Hey guys, so lately on the Zodiac Facebook group, I was seeing a lot of posts about people arguing for Winda to get banned, and while that is a conversation for another day, it made me interested in looking at the win percentage of when El Shaddoll Winda was summoned among some of the top ranked Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll players. Now if you want to see more deck specific analyses like these, then make sure to share the video and subscribe because it takes me a ton of time to do these, so let's just get started. Now I'm sure you guys just want to get right to the numbers, but just a few really important notes you have to know about this analysis. As usual, I'm only focusing on games where the Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll players went first for this Winda analysis. The only exception was that there was one player that played a going second build, so I included games where that player went second. So for the rest of the video, I'm just gonna say when the Shaddoll player went first for the sake of ease, but just know that technically there were some going second games included for that one player. Lastly, I was looking at whether at least one Winda was summoned throughout the entire game. It doesn't necessarily have to be summoned from their standard opening play where they activate Schism to bring out Winda on their opponent's first turn, for example. Could be brought out late game and it would still be flagged as summoning Winda. So let's start getting to the numbers. Now in games where the Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll player went first, they won about 2/3 of the time. Keep in mind that these were players within the top 75 ranking on Dueling Book that played Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll. There were 11 unique players that contributed to 238 games where they went first. So now when the Shaddoll player went first, they brought out at least one Winda in that game about 47% of the time. Now this was actually lower than I thought it would be, but at the same time it's not like this deck is purely Winda Turbo. For example, while 53% of the time they did not bring out Winda, it does not necessarily mean that they couldn't when they wanted to. At times they definitely had the resources to bring it out, but brought out Construct or App Clone instead because it was the better play, so just keep that in mind. Now when Winda was summoned though, the Shaddoll player won a very impressive 84% of the time. Compare that to when Winda was not summoned, they only won about 53% of the time. Now of course there's a lot more interactions that's going on other than just Winda, but this is more of a simple analysis and I can't take into account of everything. This huge gap in win percentage is pretty interesting to see of course, but I don't think we should say that Winda is the sole carrier of the deck either. So I also tried to map out the win percentage for when the different Shaddoll, Dogmatika, and Invoked engine pieces were present. So I flagged when the player brought out Mechaba, as well as when the player either had Dogmatika Punishment or a live Fleur de Lis in hand that could negate. So if you look at this graph, if the player had none of these three engine pieces, they only won about 27% of the game where they went first. Now if they had either Mechaba or one of the Dogmatika interruptions, then they won about 63% of the time. If you were to step that up a bit and the player had both the Mechaba and the Dogmatika interruption but no Winda still, they won about 77% of that game. Now if the player had just Winda but not Mechaba and no Dogmatika interruption, which does not happen too often as that's kind of an awkward situation, they won a similar amount at 76%. And was again similar if you were to add on Mechaba or a Dogmatika interruption on top of Winda, also at 76%. Now if you were to have all three, summon Winda, have Mechaba, and also have Punishment and or a live Fleur, they won 100% of the time. Now keep in mind of the small sample sizes though, obviously they're not actually winning 100% of the time when they have all these three pieces. If we had thousands of data points then this value is bound to decline a bit, but of course the win percentage is still going to be very high when they open this trifecta. One thing to note guys, I wish I took into account of other invoke monsters as well, something like Raijin or Kaliga which came up in small instances, so keep that in mind that I only took account of Mechaba for the invoked engine piece. Alright, so let's get back to the Winda win percentage, but this time separated by game 1 versus game 2 and 3, so for game 1 when they went first, so before siding, they brought out Winda essentially half the time. So a little more than the overall numbers, and when they summoned Winda at some point that game, they won about 79% of the time. In contrast, when they did not summon Winda, they only won about 51% of the time. But now let's look at this win percentage for games 2 and 3 post side, where presumably players put in more cards like Cosmic Cyclone and Twin Twisters for the Schism, as well as monster negate cards like Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplet for the Winda directly. So for games 2 and 3 when the player went first, Winda was brought out 43% of the time. A little less than game 1 because presumably the Schism was stopped more often with the quick play back row removal. Now interestingly though, even though Winda did not come out as much, but if it did, the win percentage at 89% was higher than what it was for game 1. I don't know if this little bump is actually a true meaningful difference or just variance. For example, maybe opponents try their best to stop Winda from coming out in the first place by getting rid of the Schism, but if they fail to do that, maybe they don't have too many resources left to out the Winda. Maybe I'm overthinking, I'm not sure. What do you guys think? Now if they don't bring out Winda, again, kind of similar win percentage at 54%. Okay guys, so now we are just going to cover some overall Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll win percentages, something similar to what you see in my monthly meta-analysis. I'll link my most recent one below so you can watch it if you haven't already. One note of caution though guys, up until now for this Winda analysis, all of the values were based on games. Now the numbers you are going to see will be at the match level, so keep that in mind. So our Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll players won about 75% of the matches, and this is pretty close to the 70% that I showed in my most recent meta-analysis, which of course was based on a smaller sample size since that video was not focused on Shaddolls, so it's good to see that the numbers still align. Now when the Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll player went first for game 1, they ended up winning 76% of their matches, while winning 74% of their matches if they had to go second for game 1. Keep in mind that there was that one player that played a going second build, so that probably bumped up the win percentage for this deck for this going second value, but at the same time, I found this deck to have a pretty balanced win percentage typically. Now in terms of their match win percentage versus playstyle, I think I am going to retire doing this section in my future meta-analysis because the numbers for these typically involve really small sample sizes. Anyways, against combo heavy aggro decks, as well as against going second, break your board kind of beatdown decks, they had a similar win percentage at around 70 to 72%. They did have a better win percentage against other control decks at 80% though. Alright guys, so that was it for my analysis of how often you win when you summon El Shaddoll Winda. Hope you enjoyed that. Feel free to recommend any other deck specific analysis that I could look at for my future videos. Keep in mind that these decks need to be something that are played widely online, as I need enough top players piloting the deck for me to have a good enough sample. That's it for me guys. If you liked the video, then make sure to share to your friends and consider subscribing as well. Take care.